Well, somebody who's having a right old froth, which must indicate that it's Thursday, is Dr. Roger Guiwell. He is here. He's CEO of Fair Money, personal finance and credit expert. Dr. Roger, good morning to you.
Good morning, James.
Now, everybody's excited to hear what you have to say this week. So let's have a little crack. You want to talk about interest rates, I believe.
Well, I hope I can be forgiven for my now daily rant about the recent and undoubted future.
Daily rant? Have you taken over my show?
Well, I'm certainly going to rant about the recent and undoubted future increases in interest rates by the Bank of England.
Yeah.
I don't much care what happens in other countries at this point. Let them decide their own futures. The point is, as the famous Nobel Prize-winning economist Nouriel Roubini said recently, the Bank of England and other central banks are, quote, setting a trap for themselves. Prices are skyrocketing. We're heading into, if not already, in a recession, and there's no end in sight. In fact, things are going to get worse because I don't think we've even seen a hint yet of what President Putin has in mind going forward. And that is the point. It's not inflation that's the problem. It's oil and gas that is, James.
Can I just ask you, though, because I kind of agree with you to an extent about interest rates, that when we were putting up interest rates and people said this will combat inflation, it doesn't combat inflation if we are dealing with a jolt or a supply-side problem, in the sense that we're dealing with oil and gas prices which have gone up not as a result of increased demand particularly or excess demand, but as a result of a global market shock. So I agree with that, but, and my but is quite big. That's another conversation altogether. I've
Maybe
been on
that's
a
for
dive.
another show.
No, that's for another show. Blimey. The but is an important one, though. Let's talk about America. If America puts up interest rates and the currency shifts and we start to see a strong dollar and a weak pound, we have to put up our interest rates in order to attract international investment in our currency. Otherwise, we see inflation through the back door. So we already have a very weak pound. If we do not increase our interest rates in line with what's happening with the States and the fact that the US economy is pretty strong because there is a huge amount of oil and fracking and various other things there, and they don't have the same inflationary pressures, then we will continue to see extra inflationary pressure here in the UK unless we match it.
Well, that's a very good argument, but I think it's a choice between several evils, James. The biggest problem we have is oil and gas. President Putin has got a plan, obviously. And even if Europe keeps buying oil and gas from him, one day he may turn around and say, right, I'm not selling you anymore. He's out to destroy the West.
He is out to destroy, and I agree that that is the biggest problem. But what I don't get is that we keep being told that our green energy, so the renewables, are really cheap. I don't understand why we don't have a differential market that says you are allowed to buy a certain amount of green energy, and that will be charged at a far lower rate, and we produce it ourselves, by the way, and that's what you'll be charged. And then if you need to have, and you need to top it up with oil and gas, then you pay the oil and gas price. I don't understand why nobody has intervened to sort this out.
Nobody's intervened with at least a dozen easy fixes. The politicians, our candidates for prime minister, aren't even talking about it. But the real problem is not inflation. It's the inflation of oil and gas. And all that happens, and that is the most critical thing right now, it's going to cause millions of people to lose their home. The interest rate rises. It's going to destroy generation rent, the young people who can't even get a home. And raising interest rates further does nothing other than exacerbate the situation. Yeah?
Well, it may do, but there must be a level of interest rates at which we can deal or tolerate. And I would say that rate is probably somewhere between 2.5% and 3.5%. And if our nation cannot tolerate that level of interest rate, then frankly, we've been borrowing too much money anyway.
Well, I wouldn't agree. I think that that's probably too high, and it's going to hurt millions and millions of people at a time when they're being...
Just because you're wearing a badge, Roger, that says I'm right, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are.
Oh, it carries a lot of authority, this badge, but still.
Unbelievable. All right. Let's then turn on to your next topic, though, because I think this leads into something. you've identified that there may very well be civil unrest. And I think that this is one of the things that we do need to be very, very aware of, which is if and when people are pushed too far. Look, we all know that prices are going up. We all know that we're going to have less money in our pockets. And we all know that it doesn't matter where you are, economically speaking, the next few weeks, months, and maybe even years, they are going to be very, very tough. That having been said, there's a certain amount that people will tolerate, and then they won't.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the possibility of social unrest, the breakdown of the social contract, things like 50 youths between 14 and 16 invading a McDonald's in Nottingham the other day, stealing food, abusing staff. You can't...
I mean, that was quite shocking, wasn't it, that particular incident, which it just shows we rely on lawful behaviour by people behaving themselves, that they go into a shop, they go into a restaurant, that they behave with decorum, that they don't just steal stuff, because there is a lot of stuff that's just hanging around. I mean, you go into a shop, there's stuff there that if you wanted to, and if there wasn't going to be, some kind of consequence, you could go in, fill your boots and walk out again. I mean, that's partly why Woolworths went bust, is that they taught people how to steal stuff and not to buy it. But that's, this is a major problem, isn't it?
Well, no, this incident was strangely gratuitous. There was something very eerie about it. And, I'm just wondering if that isn't the start of some social unrest. I spoke last week about Michael Burry, the genius who made a fortune on the subprime housing crisis 10 years ago, putting all his money into prison stock. So there may well be something coming. I think people are indeed getting fed up.
I think they are indeed. Talking getting fed up, is somebody finished?
Well, I keep thinking about the Prime Minister of Finland, the party-loving 36-year-old Sanna Marin. And the latest thing on her now, apart from her partying, is that she had two friends of hers, female influencer models, standing topless behind her desk in what would be the equivalent of the Oval Office. Now, that really beats Boris standing with a beer and a sandwich at an office party, doesn't it? And I'm just wondering if the Finnish government will topple, if the Finns will trash their government, their economy the way we have as a result of this.
I mean, I do wonder that when you have a look at the reasons that Boris Johnson left office, whether we'll look back in history and say, okay, we understand about them, lying and various other things, and that was the reason, but whether or not we will come to regret that decision is another matter entirely. Roger, thank you so much for joining us once again. Enjoy the badge. I think people will now come up to you in the supermarket and they'll go, I saw you on TalkTV. But we'll have to have conversations about whether or not it is really, whether you really are right. But there we are. That's Dr. Roger Keeval, CEO of Fair Money, personal finance and credit expert. Meanwhile,